Welcome to Development Discourse, where we ideate for Africa's development. My name is Patrick Okigbo, founding partner Nextier. Nextier is a multi-competency advisory firm focused on solving Africa's complex development problems. So why is Africa unable to punch at its weight class? Some scholars will attribute this to geographic and environmental factors or extractive institutions. Some will say that the continent is stuck in a poverty trap. Some scholars argue that it's a failure of financial aid. Some blame it on colonialism and exploitation stereotypes, corruption, or just an interplay of the continent's triple heritage. Professor Osita Ogbu suggests that it has much to do with leadership philosophy and attitude and the citizens' orientation. He's a professor of development economics at the University of Nigeria, my alma mater. He was Nigeria's Minister of National Planning from 2005 to 2006 and former Chief Economic Advisor to the President of Nigeria. He once served as the Executive Director of the Africa Technology Policy Studies Network in Nairobi, after serving as a Senior Program Specialist in economics of the International Development Research Center in Canada. Earlier in his career, he was a consultant research economist at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. He was also a visiting fellow at the Brookings Institution's Africa Growth Initiative. Professor Ogbu was the director of the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Nigeria. Aside from having served as former chairman of the Governing Council of the National Institute for Economic and Social Research, Nigeria's premier research institution, he is the chief executive officer of the African Development Solutions International and a member of the Global Advisory Board of the Institute for Governance and Economic Transformation. Professor Ogbu, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Now, your book's central thesis, if I'm to kind of summarize it in 2 sentences, is that leaders have a more than proportionate impact on society's progress. The leader's philosophy and their ideals shape that progress. Where a leader is lacking, he or she should look for and engage the right people. Have I done a fairly decent job of summarizing it?
Well, yes, in a way. Thank you very much for the introduction. The idea behind the book is, as you know, we are all in this continuous search for an explanation as to why we are where we are.
Correct.
And why we are not making a lot of progress. And quite frankly, I have been involved in asking these questions for over 35 years. And during my inaugural, my subject matter was, why are they so poor? Where I sort of brought together all the work I have been doing over the years. But I've landed where I am with this book, because when I studied nations that have emerged, I have come to realize that those nations were led by leaders that had clarity in terms of philosophy, in terms of values, in terms of knowledge, which is really what I'm summarizing as attitude, to overcome the challenges that development itself entails. So the idea behind the book is that, and that's why I call the book also a book on comparative development perspective, because we examined the leadership philosophy of many countries, especially their early leaders, what they did, what they have done, how they saw the future even before their citizens did. But then they mobilized their citizens to follow that vision. So a leader's moral standing, values, a leader's knowledge, a leader's, because development, after all, is really about evaluation of values, choices, course of action, and then taking decisions that are supposed to uplift the citizens. So you can see how central the attitude and ideology of a leader can be.
And you spent quite a bit of time on Lateef Jakonde in Lagos and the work he did. And I wonder what shaped. So if you look at Lateef Jakonde, he has many of the attributes that you speak to, that a leader should have. Is it the circumstance of the time that created those leaders? Or what is it about their upbringing, their experiences, that then endows them with all of these things that you've now called attitude?
The reason why I included a chapter on Jakonde was actually to illustrate the deficiencies in our leadership recruitment process, especially in Nigeria. And I guess saying that the whole essence of that chapter on Jakonde was to illustrate the importance of leadership recruitment process. And that Jakonde was tutored by Chief Awolowo. And I went back to dig into the philosophy of Awolowo. And one of the major things Awolowo was known for was the free education. And then I underscored the difficulties he had when he wanted to implement that free education. Because his calculations were off. He didn't anticipate the response that his free education will elicit. And quite frankly, somebody who was not dedicated will have backed away. But he said, no, I've made the promise. I must stand by the promise. And he found a way. You know, it was in that chapter that I quoted the Federalist paper number 62 by James Madison. It was in that chapter. You know, that statement by James Madison, and if you allow me, I will quote it. He said, sure, a good government implies two things. First, fidelity to the object of governance, which is the happiness of the people. So the first thing is you must have fidelity with the object of governance, which is happiness of the people. But more importantly, secondly, a knowledge of the means by which that object can be best obtained. This second part is so crucial. Meaning, even if you knew the first one, even if you had fidelity on how to improve, that you need to improve the happiness of the people, do you know how to do it? So you need to have the knowledge of the means. So Awo did not back away. He rather went back, retooled. He said, instead, I will build these schools with mud. So he built actually mud houses and schools. He brought people who had retired back into government. So Jakonde grew under this kind of tutelage. No wonder he came in and he built this low-cost housing that nobody, in spite of all our wealth, has been able to match. So you can see a person that was groomed by, trained by. You know, sometimes we even ask even teachers, lecturers, who trained you? I mean, from which philosophy did you drink from? What is governing? You know, as I tell my students, you know, knowledge is not value free. Knowledge has ideological content. And so it depends, you know, there's a Chicago school, there's a Harvard school, there is even a Howard school where I went to. There is a way of thinking. And so if there is no way of thinking, if anything goes, which is also what informs the way we even structure our budgets, because it's like anything goes.
Yeah. Okay. So
are you still with me?
We missed some part of the last statement, but I think we got the general.
Oh, really?
Flow. Okay. Yeah. When you started talking about the budget and how we throw things into the budget.
Yeah, I was saying that if there was a general philosophy, a general framework, some of the things that are in the budget will not show up.
Correct. Because
a leader will have created a certain values, certain parameters around that same budget, because there is a guiding philosophy around it.
Where did we miss the bus? So we saw the First Republic, Second Republic, Jakonde came through in the Second Republic. There was still some level of values that drove governance in those two republics. What happened that made us miss the bus? And what I'm trying to drive at is, to what extent is this a question of circumstance and the situation and conditions under which the people are living at a time that then shapes the kind of leaders they get? And then probably, how do you fix that?
Actually, post-military regime, meaning in 1999, my guess is that many people did not think that will sustain. And so the space was left. And money politics, because if you look at even the qualifications of the First Republic and Second Republic leaders, they were quite well trained. Some of them had written books. Some of them were journalists, opinion molders, and so on. They had done things in the past. They didn't just emerge from nothing. It was only in 1999 that we saw people that we didn't hear about before. They had no prior experiences. I used to say that, do you know that you may have a governor who has never written a memo before until he became governor? and that's a fact.
Yeah.
And so we people that you couldn't say this is what they did before, society acknowledged them, they did this, they did. No, people simply used resources and emerged. Unfortunately, it is self-perpetuating. People like me, I tried to be governor of Enugu State, but where is the wherewithal? They will say, oh, Professor Osita Ogbu will make the best governor bet. I say, what is this bet? No, the bet is two things. One, you don't have the resources. Two, if you get in, you might not indulge us in the sharing mechanism. So where we got it wrong was that once this set got in, everybody else knew that to get in, you required a lot more resources than even those who were there. And so there is a cyclical perpetuation of the same class. And like I said, they have raised the entry barrier, as it were. Only once in a while, a benevolent governor might seek for a good person and say, I think, in spite of money, this is someone that I think I should hand over. And that concept of even a governor selecting successor itself is problematic. We need to even interrogate our own democracy.
Exactly. Now, what's the role for the governed? What's because again, the subtitle of the book, speaks to the citizens' orientation. To what extent does the values and the quality of the people who are governed demand or shape the attitude of their leaders?
There are two things, or a couple of things. One is that poverty and democracy are not related. They are, distant cousins. They are not. It's difficult to operate a true democracy when you have this level of poverty.
Correct.
And let's be very clear. Poverty is not simply the absence of material. Poverty affects cognition. And therefore affects choices that people make. So when you blame the poor, you have to be very careful. So the choices the poor make are conditioned by that poverty. So when you say somebody has been paid 5,000 and he sold his vote, you should have a sense that his cognition has been impaired by absence of well-being, if I may put it that way. So the citizens have a duty, but you see, the leader without value. Remember, the Chinese philosophy of Confucius philosophy. Remember, the foundation for that philosophy is moral uprightness. If the emperor is upright, he will govern well and the people will feel good. So if the people, because what is happening now is that Nigerians do not have faith in leadership.
Correct.
And the values of the leader does not percolate down, rather, the current values shape the values of the followers. So it will change the values of the leader, it will equally change the values of the followership. So everyone is scrambling with a follower to see which part of the pie he or she can grab.
So my question is there any room for the values of the followers to influence the values of the leader, given the real structural challenges we face, poverty being a major one?
Absolutely. But like I said, if you have this level of poverty, there are many good people in Nigeria, but right now they are crowded by immediate survival. That what is uppermost in their mind is opportunities for what I get. Especially, we have a peculiar problem as well, which if you read the book, I'm sure you read the book, you will see me in almost every chapter talk about sense of nation. The absence of sense of nation. Meaning, even when a group rises to impose the common value of the masses, another competing group, which is also suffering the same problem as the group A, might counter simply because the leader is from my group.
Correct.
The leader is from where I come from.
Correct.
And I don't understand what these people are trying to do, as if you are better off simply because somebody is from where you come from. So we have those disjointedness that exist within, even among the masses. Again, driven by the initial point I made about poverty and cognition and poor choices.
But isn't that contestation the way you then arrive at how the people want to live and how they want to be governed? Because there is no nation I know of that reads from one single hymn book. It is a contestation of ideas. People rise, people contest, and then something forms. So isn't that the natural way it happens? Now, where I'm struggling is realizing where we are and how things are so broken without the emergence of that great man that would appear from somewhere and then lead us in a particular direction, such as, when we got lucky with an Obasanjo in 99, it may appear like we, the masses, have no choice in or no impact on our future until luck happens.
By the way, where are your choices when the process itself that throws up the people that you are supposed to be exercising your choice over is already rigged somehow? Meaning the internal dynamics of the parties and the way they emerge, the candidates emerge, in itself is problematic. And so what this means is that you need there is work, there's complete reorientation of even the citizens. But you made a point. You talk about contestation of ideas. Are you still there?
Yes.
I wish we were talking about contestation of ideas, because in the country where you are interviewing me from, you will know that the objectives are the same, but the paths are different. One says, I will attain this path through this means. Another says, I will attain it through another means. But at least ideas are being contested even though, of course, as we know in the US, their own democracy is also coming under peril because the values are being muddled up. But in our case, the contestation of ideas have not been the driving force for how our leaders emerge.
Yeah. So when I read, as I read the book and try to understand the theory, I drew a lot of similarities with the great man theory. The Thomas Carlyle's 19th century great man theory. Where he posits that history and societal progress are primarily what shapes the actions of extraordinary leaders, right? And often they're characterized by the same personal qualities that you spoke of. But there have been so many critiques or criticisms of that theory. The main one being that it tends to focus too much on that individual versus and overlooks some of the structural or institutional factors that influence societal outcomes. And an example that came to mind is we will both agree that Chairman Mao had good intentions, when he embarked on his great leap forward. Yeah, the attitude was right. His economics was off. Yeah, but you won't question his attitude. So is the question really about attitude, or is there more to it? Someone like Chairman Mao, right? He had the right attitude. But his economics was off, right? And there were so many other structural issues and institutional factors that he didn't take into consideration. So is the core challenge the attitude, or is there more to
it? You mentioned a couple of things before you came to the question, including institutions.
Yes.
Recently, in my university, I was telling the PhD students that I need someone who will do a research on how our political market creates uncertainty in the economic market. And some of them were asking me, oh, so there's a political market. I said, of course, there's a political market. The political market as an institution. You see, the critique of the theory that emphasis is on leader forgets that this leader represents institution.
Okay.
And that this leader, the values he possesses, will percolate within the institution. So the political leader, the superstructure that is politics. So in the institutions, if you take who appoints the governor of central bank, who appoints the minister of finance, who prepares the budget, who is in the National Assembly, who is the president of the Senate, all of these are political actors. They are product of a political process. So if a leader has a certain vision and transmits that vision, these institutions accordingly, even who appoints boards of governors of institutions, who sets the terms of reference, who creates new ministries and disbands another, you can see that it is not the person, it is what the person transmits to institutions and what that institution will now do in accordance with the values it has received. So let's make a distinction that it is not that the only thing is that we interpret the values through statements, through the actions of the leader, and we can see that the institutions respond accordingly. I don't know whether I have...
Sure. But I still struggle. Okay, so let me explore another angle.
Okay.
I understand that the leader must have the right attitude, the right philosophy, etc. But what if you have a leader that has that, but there's a chasm between where the leader is and where the followers are? Yeah. For instance, some of our mutual friends, who have assumed high political office, one of them lost the governorship after a first tenure because whilst he was looking to build structural change, the people were focused on stomach infrastructure. So how does a leader close that gap without getting into the same challenges that a Lee Kuan Yew, a Paul Kagame, faced, where they're seen as dictatorial whilst working within a democratic, system. How does a leader deal with that?
No, you are now taking us into the realm of change and change management.
Okay.
When you want to create change, first of all, you must build a coalition of change agents. My favorite example for those who are Christians is that Christ created 12 apostles. So you must have this coalition of change agents that will carry your message. And that message must be constantly repeated. But one of the major steps in creating change is that while the ultimate change is to transform society and create the structures you're talking about, there must be quick wins. I don't want to use the term stomach infrastructure because that's not the right thing. There must be deliverables along the line. There must be things people see and appreciate before you can take them to the El Dorado. Remember that Christ himself was performing miracles along the path. Yes, he was.
Whilst we wait for heaven.
Water. Exactly. So a leader must understand this process and have inbuilt consciously, it's a conscious decision to that while I am going to change structures, there are things I must still deliver to the people in order for me to sustain this change. I think that was a missing gap, and we see it every time among leaders, including those who are governing now, that they simply think I have good intention, I can do this, but have you carried the people along? Have you communicated well? Do people understand? And secondly, in research, that's what we call the problematic, meaning if something is the thing that has created the headache, there are various ways of resolving the headache. How did you choose A as against B? And who did you discuss this with? And who did you come along with? Very important in governance.
So again, in the book, you argued that true sovereignty lies with the people. Yeah. And it's an interesting concept. But is this an empirical fact? Can a poor and disenfranchised people truly demand change from their leaders? Is there any country where the masses have successfully demanded and achieved that political change? And I'm not talking about the middle class, which is what happened in, say, France or the United Kingdom, etc. So in your thinking around this idea of true sovereignty lying with the people, what are the practical steps, to realize it?
No, well, the practical step is that you have to educate the people. And the practical step is that we
but why would the elite educate the people to realize that they have true power?
No, because it might be self-contradictory. In the end, everybody will be consumed. Look at the so-called elite, you can't move freely. The so-called elite, you have to create barriers in your own house. The so-called elite, you move with an army. So the elite, there's a self-interest in also having an enlightened society, because it reduces our burden and creates a situation where we can move freely and act freely. So this might be for a while, but it will not last forever. Okay, so that's go ahead.
Maybe complete your thought before I take it in a different direction.
No, I was saying that the sovereignty, it is for the. I guess my difficulty and maybe the difficulty of many Nigerians is that we thought we have been on the right path. Nothing is perfect. The difficulty we have, some of us have, is that when we think we have made 2 steps forward, even in granting that sovereignty, in improving our electoral process, in guaranteeing that your vote will count, it seems like we are making 2-3 steps back. So These are some of the things we must deal with.
Mm.
Otherwise, you know, the country can make progress. And remember, if you take the president Yaradua, remember what he said.
Yeah.
The process that brought me was flawed.
Correct.
And he wanted to take steps to correct it. Incidentally, he didn't last long. So such a leader may eventually emerge. He emerged afterwards.
So you're back again to this, our, salvation coming by luck, not by some kind of engineered process, because luck happened, and Obasanjo came in, who was a bit pan-Nigerian, pulled people from everywhere, irrespective of, the tongue and tribe, drove the economy. A bit of luck happened. He went, he governed during an oil boom. Yeah. And then you had a bit of luck with Yaradua, who came in and said, okay, the process was flawed. We're going to fix it. Even if by fixing it, I lose an election. Yeah. But can a nation be built on luck? Isn't there, because in your book as well, you talk about development planning, right? Which assumes that there is a conscious, systematic way of planning your destiny. Yeah. Correct. But it seems that we keep coming back to when luck happens or when God answers our prayers.
No, but you're the one who is calling it luck. I'm not the one who is calling it luck. So if it is luck, then it means the emergence of Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore was luck. Mahathir Mohamad, the emergence was luck. So no, this, even when Obasanjo thought it would be Yaradua, he didn't fully understand Yaradua's philosophy. He didn't predict that Yaradua would come and say the election that brought me was flawed. No. So the individual, the intrinsic nature of the person, the values they possess. That's why I say, let's examine who these people are. What have they done in the past? What moral standing do they have? These are indicators of what the person is and what they would do.
Correct.
So if all of these things are put on the table, then you can say, hey, how is that luck? You've already examined these people.
No, but the question is, who would do that examining, right?
No, the examining, just like in any other process, there are people who maintain the guardrail. Okay. There are enforcers. There are, political elite. There are, because you cannot overburden the masses when they're not even admitted into the room. So those who have been admitted into the room should now see that we have not made any progress. I used to say that when I watched the budgetary fiasco in Nigeria, I wrote a piece one time and I said, whose budget is before the National Assembly? And I published it in the newspapers. Because I can't understand a minister of government going to National Assembly and said, my allocation is small, please increase it. It was your principal who sent this budget and gave you that small allocation, indicating that your ministry this year did not have priority. How do you go behind the principal and go and ask for an increased budget? I don't understand it. And I don't know how a president will tolerate it. Under Obasanjo, it was, I don't think any minister could attempt that. So the point to be made is there has to be clarity. The leader himself must know and direct, because if that leader is clear, there's nothing wrong with bringing the leadership of National Assembly to the table and say, there is a reason why this budget I'm sending to you looks this way.
Correct.
It's because of the direction in which I think the nation should go. Can you people please come along with me? So okay, there's a lot.
Okay, let me shift gears now to development planning, because you also spent quite a bit of time on that in the book.
Correct.
And you described it as translating a collective national vision into an improvement in the overall well-being of a nation's citizens. Now, that definition assumes a number of things. it assumes that there's a collective national vision. It assumes that there's a sense of nation, and you speak a lot about it in the book, a common identity, a common aspiration. Clearly, we don't have these factors fully aligned in Nigeria. I'm not sure any nation quite has everything fully aligned, but they tend to develop, right? Now, my question is, for a nation that is still struggling with all of these elements of your definition, can we really have an effective development planning? And I ask it because you have been responsible for that task for Nigeria. So as national planning minister, yeah? So practical terms here, can we really do national development planning in Nigeria if we don't have all those elements?
You repeated what I had said in the book. That we were planning in an uncommon environment. That planning envisions a shared vision, a sense of nation. And I said, in the absence of elite consensus, because if you have elite consensus, the executive cannot be singing one song and the legislator will be singing another song. So it is difficult, but not impossible. And that's why we talk about the values and ideology and knowledge of the leader, who can begin to craft this consensus. Remember that the budget I mentioned before is a plan. It's just a 1 year plan. So if you had a 5-year plan, that budget represents 1 year out of the 5 years.
A subset.
A subset. So in the same manner in which you could build coalition around the budget, is the same manner in which you could build a coalition. By the way, Mahathir Mohamad did the same. When a development plan was crafted for him in the 60s or 70s, he said, beautiful, but I'll put this aside. And I think I quoted this in my book.
Correct.
And he said, I will first build the nation. Let me take steps to unite Malaysians. Because as you know, they have Indians, Chinese, Malays, and others. He said, I want Bangstar Malaysia, a Malaysia that is united with one purpose, but different culture and different people, but we all belong to one nation. So you can see a leader that understands that this is a prerequisite. And it took steps. They re-engineered their economic policies to accommodate the Malays. I went to Malaysia. I mean, the rich, the middle class, and there are small cars for everyone. There are buses. There are good roads. There are schools. There are. I mean, as a social scientist, I started making inquiries as to how come people are relatively relaxed and happy. It took the work of this leader, to re-engineer. So it goes back to our point. Someone emerges and says, I have come to lead Nigerians, not my tribe. I will show signs. I have even advocated. I said, one of our greatest problems is national integration. And yet there's no institution working on it. The National Orientation Agency is not equipped to deal with national integration. Why is it that we don't have National Integration Commission that brings all the institutions of national integration together and begin to reinforce these values that we are one? So it can be done.
Okay, so given that we're struggling to achieve that at the national level, given the clamoring, I guess, now for a bit of regionalism, do you think that the answer could be with regional planning versus national planning?
It might be a start. If there is a consensus within the region. Because I used to say that, you need to create regional citizenship. It's like what the Abia state governor has done now. He said, I will abolish state of origin. I think I read something like that.
Yes.
So it means that the region must have regional citizens. And so we were no longer going to be from Enugu or Abia, and we will all be citizens of that region. It is a prerequisite for this kind of planning. And part of it is, and is in my book too, that a weak part, that the strong part must understand that the weak part is part of the group. And that what happens in that weak part affects us. You know, remember during Jonathan administration, I wrote a very important piece, in my view, where I said the national, that President Goodluck should appoint a national coordinator for the North. In other words, that the problem of Northern Nigeria in terms of statistics and the difference between the North and South in development indices was the gap was too much that we should no longer leave these issues to the North alone. It should be brought to the national fore. It is our problem. Let's deal with it as ours. So even in regional government, as they say, you are as strong as your weakest part. Yeah, the weakest link. So that regional government might give us a sense of oneness, might give us a sense of we belong together, but it still requires a conscious effort to create the citizenship.
And I think President Jonathan understood that. I think he made significant efforts to solve the problems in the North, even the Amajari schools that he tried to push for at the time. But that's a classic example of what we talked about initially, where the leader, you know, might have the right attitude, the right philosophy, but there's a bit of a chasm between him and the people, because the people didn't quite understand, and that was why they moved to change him, you know. So maybe like Jesus Christ, he should have been doing some small miracles as he's promising, promising to get us to heaven.
This is change management. Yes.
So you spoke in the book about growth poles, you know, and where the growth will come from. Could you explain a bit your thinking around that idea?
No, I think it came from my study of China, where I said many people do not understand that the initial spot for growth in China came from east, the east of China, eastern region, until they now developed plans on how to extend it to the other regions. The reason why I say that is that there exists already certain, if you like, industrial poles in Nigeria. And sometimes, because of this lack of sense of nation, we think we should create something where there is nothing for the sake of balancing. So if Aba is booming and Aba could project us as the Taiwan of Nigeria, then somebody is going to say, why are you not creating the equivalent of Aba in some northeast or northwest or southwest? There's no equivalent of Aba, let's say. But you can plan for that. But the second point they fail to realize is that if, for instance, Aba is booming, it means you can go to Kano and say, all the leather you are exporting outside this country without processing will now be processed so that Aba can use it. So the growth of one pole can actually lead to the development of other poles. So my point is, we sometimes over-dramatize the idea of federal character, the idea of creating something when there's nothing, rather than actually supporting what exists and what can be in the best interest of the country. And I'll give you another quick example. There was a time there was a debate in the National Assembly as to whether they should support rail metro line in Lagos. And I was like, is that not obvious that metro line in Lagos should be a national project? It's not a Lagos state project. You know, but it didn't fly because it was seen as Lagos state project. So how do you begin to sensitize people to these kinds of issues so that, you know, they are not approached parochially?
How do you, Prof? I mean, I know you're not a political scientist, but how do you, if the president approached you today and said, lay out for me a roadmap on how we get Nigerians to see Nigeria as a portfolio of investments, right? where if we see an opportunity in Maiduguri, we put a lot of effort because we know that the proceeds from that can help develop, opportunities in Calabar. How do you communicate this to a president who genuinely wants to do it? How does he get to carry everybody along?
By the way, why do you think I wrote the book? And why are we having this conversation? So you're asking me how, when I'm already embedded in the how.
Yes.
So the point is, listen, messaging is important.
Mm-hmm.
Actions taken are important. Sense of inclusion is very important. So once you begin the messaging to say, Mahathir Mohamad didn't just say, he acted. He took steps to say all of us are one. Mm-hmm. So, even the disturbance in the East, I used to say that if President Buhari, when he was sick, asked his plane not to land in Abuja, but to land in Enugu, I want to see these boys who are making noise. Mm-hmm. They are also my children. I mean, mm-hmm. This is symbolism, but the effect will be great.
Too much.
Symbolism. But so there are things leaders must do to begin to build our, it's not a global common now, it's a country common. Mm-hmm. To begin to say, your headache is my headache. Mm-hmm. This part, we need to resolve it, and so on. So it cannot be to hell with you. No, of course not. If Boko Haram is harassing Northeast, it's our problem. Mm-hmm. It's not their problem. I mean, you can see practically the food prices
everywhere.
Yeah, exactly, everywhere. So leaders have a lot, because first of all, they control institutions, they control the military, the police. So there's a lot that you can communicate, that will make sense,
In a few minutes, we'll open it up for questions from our participants. If you may, just type the questions in the Q&A box. I will read them out and attribute them to you. In the book, you spoke about that Africa needs intellectual freedom fighters. Good imagery there, good concept, but how does that work in practice? What does it mean in practice? How do we arrive at this, fundamental development philosophy that we need intellectual freedom fighters? What does it mean?
Okay, Patrick, you should Google my TED talk on this subject. TEDx talk on intellectual freedom. Yes, okay, maybe you've seen it.
I've seen it.
Yeah. Okay. This idea actually came from the fact that we have knowledgeable people that were beginning to lose confidence in themselves. There's nothing as bad as self-doubt. There's nothing as bad as intellectual dependence. I think it's one of the leaders in Israel that talked about morality and intellectual dependence as part of the bedrock for governance. Mm. For as long as we keep thinking there is someone with ideas with which we shall develop, this development will be elusive. Mm. So intellectual freedom fighters is saying, can we create a cadre of knowledgeable people? Not necessarily people with PhD, knowledgeable people. Mm-hmm. It can be artists, it can be musicians, but who have so much confidence in themselves, in what they know, that they are able to challenge the so-called established facts, stylized facts, to bring contextual knowledge into play. Because as I began to speak recently to people, I said, there's a difference between knowledge and understanding. Mm-hmm. So somebody might have knowledge, but he doesn't have understanding. Because that knowledge has no context and therefore lacks purpose, really. So when somebody flies in from America, anywhere, and tells the Minister of Finance or CBN governor, you do X and X, I said, this is simplifying a complex issue with a simple solution. What some of us call partial analysis. But I'm now derailing into something else. But the point is, we need a cadre. Do you know that when I originated this idea, I will see our African researchers reaching a certain conclusions from their work, and they run away from the conclusion because it does not conform with mainstream. You can't run away. You did work. Don't you believe in this work? Publish it. So we are looking for those who can take, because to be an African freedom fighter carries risk.
Of course.
It means you're not worried about your next contract, your next consulting assignment. Who is this guy with an independent view?
Yeah.
I know the price some of us have paid.
Yeah.
In this regard. So, some of us are willing to pay it, but it is those who are willing to pay that price that we want to recruit.
Along the same lines, I have a comment from Ben Wosu, who I'm sure you know very well, Dr. Ben Wosu. And he says, Prof, are you scared of saying that we need a revolution?
I think Ben has to lead this revolution. First, we need to, but we've already addressed this point where we said the masses are not in agreement because of divisions and parochialism. So even that revolution may be far-fetched, the way he thinks of it. But I think the point he's making is that if this political market remains polluted as it is, the economic market cannot function.
And again, I think we romanticize about revolutions, but I have not seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've not seen a nation that was built out of the type of revolution that Nigerians are thinking of, because whenever we talk about revolution, people are thinking the French Revolution, guillotine a few leaders, but we also saw how that revolution ended, where the people who started it and guillotined a number of people suffered the same fate. And at the end of the day, they went back to status quo. So I'm not sure if revolution, the way it is being defined in Nigeria, is the answer.
No, but unless there is a cadre of an enlightened middle class, enlightened elite, revolutions actually, and even when the masses will drive it, somebody sometimes ignites it.
Interesting. I have a comment here from Elima Ezani, and she said, maybe all we've been waiting for is a woman, a great woman to lead the country. I don't know if you have an opinion on this, or maybe it's just a passing comment, but, we keep going back to this thing about women make better leaders, and maybe there should be a move to try a woman since we've been trying men. Prof, I don't know if you have a comment on that.
I don't think it's a gender issue. I don't think it's male or female. I think we need it's not just one leader, leaders with the right ideology, the right values, right knowledge. And when you don't have that knowledge, the humility, as James Madison said, if you don't have the knowledge of the means, are you able to assemble those with the knowledge of the means, irrespective of where they come from, to assist with driving your agenda? But one has to remain focused. One has to have a vision of where it wants to take the country and a guiding philosophy, because otherwise you'll be going on all directions.
Exactly. And all of that assumes that the leader has a philosophy and attitude, focused on development, and that is
correct.
What for that leader to begin to look for help.
Oh, absolutely.
I have a comment from Eze, and it's on leadership recruitment, and he posted this earlier on in the conversation, that he wanted that this whole thing should be focused on leadership recruitment. how do we disrupt the electoral system such that recruitment becomes a merit-based system? If I add to that, how do we even go back to grooming the new cadre of leaders who will be part of the political process, but also just part of the leadership cadre across both private and public?
Well, one of the things I often say is that people should not stay on the fence. And I can say that because I didn't. Even the position I held with under Obasanjo, I resigned it to go and run for office. So I have the credential to say I tried. So people should join the political process. Because if you build a critical mass, it's like what we used to say when we were in the Federal Executive Council. The technocrats were few, but those of us that were few were vocal and got some of the things done. But can you imagine if we were a lot more?
Correct.
Exactly. So, and there was some respect we earned because our colleagues knew that we came to the table with something. But there was also the idea that we came there without having paid our dues. I mean, we didn't know how elections were won, and we were being told.
Yeah.
So if you have a critical mass, you might begin, and so people must make themselves available first before you can even be chosen. That's the point I want to make.
There's a comment from Olumide Olaniyan. A key challenge is Nigeria is perpetually in a state of being a nation state, a state of many uncooperative nations, and not consolidating on becoming a country of one nation. We hear this argument a lot, Nigeria is a mere geographic expression, too many sub-nationalities within the nation, no sense of nationhood. Is that really the problem? And I asked that question, Prof, because that would have been the problem if we saw that there are 36 booming economies, right? And the problem is that we can't add up those 36 to get more than 36. But the fact that we have 36 states that are not doing well, doesn't it just negate this whole debate about being multiple nations and that if we broke up or whatever, we'll solve the problem?
No, that's why when I speak about leaders, somebody should not think we are simply talking about national leader. As a matter of fact, I remember when I finished running for governor, a certain World Bank representative was congratulating me for taking that step and said that as far as he was concerned, governors were even a lot more important than the president because they can pursue things that affect the citizens directly. So when we speak about leaders, we're also speaking about leaders at different tiers. And we even speak, you see, when next we're having this conversation, I often say, if you are made a vice chancellor, what have you done with the resources that was made available to you to run the university? Did you upgrade? Did you take the university to a new level? Or are you always saying Nigeria is not doing well? When you yourself, in your pocket of influence, you didn't do well. So in various pockets of influence, people must try to do what is best and bring their values into that activity, institution, or program, or So, yes, sense of nation is fundamental. And I said there is no perfect nation, but the building blocks must exist in such a way that people do not perceive, because perception is very important, that we are not treated fairly, equally, equitably, and so on. Or this idea of some people didn't vote for me, therefore, no, of course not. The election is over. We're now into governance. Exactly. And we need to uplift all people, Exactly. So, so those signaling, extremely important. In fact, that's what we study in economics. Signals, what does this represent in terms of overall cohesion? So leaders have a responsibility to bring us together. And we need to create a strong institution to build this cohesion.
So, Prof, there's a part of the book I struggled with a little bit. So first of all, I agree with you that where you argued that equality instead of poverty is the main cause of insecurity. I agree with that.
Inequality, you mean?
Inequality.
Yes.
Yeah. And then you moved on to argue that maybe Lagos State, for instance, could levy a 20% tax on people living in Lekki and Ikoyi and so on to build public housing for the poor. Yeah. Is that an attempt at narrowing inequality, or is it just socialism, which we have seen to have struggled to work in other parts of the world?
No. You are now arguing like the early American leaders who did not understand what's his name? Franklin D. Roosevelt,
the
32nd president of the United States.
Yeah.
Let me quote for you what he said. He said, "I see 1/3 of a nation ill-housed, ill-clad, ill-nourished. The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little." And then he concluded by saying, "Necessitous men are not free men, Patrick." Necessitous, and it goes back to fundamentally to the question you were asking me earlier about citizens and the point I made about poverty and condition. Necessitous men are not free men. So if they are not free, how do you expect them to exercise the franchise of election and free choice? But to the question.
Yes.
The idea is here, the land that this Ikoyi and VI and all these people are living on belongs to all Lagos people, right? And I'm saying, and it's just an example, because it's the same thing in Enugu. When you sell land in Independence layout and you make a lot of money, why can't a proportion of that money be devoted to public house? That's the point I'm making. Because if you realize that the people are ill-clad, ill-housed, then they are not free. They don't have a sense of belonging in that country. So when Roosevelt started this movement that eventually led to the creation of Housing and Urban Development Unit, they thought he was socialist. But until he pushed, and an act was enacted that, as you know, in the United States, we have public housing. Even if there's no structure, they have support for people that are poor that can, access housing. So nations must provide for their weak. And you can do a progressive taxation that allows you to do so. Or just in selling of these public lands can provide you resources with which you create certain. And by the way, inequality is a major issue. In the United States where you are staying and in Nigeria, each time I visit the US, I said, they will be saying, let's add more police, let's add more police. And I'm saying, no, you have to deal with this gap. There is, this huge gap. And in Nigeria, it's getting worse because what takes people out of poverty is access to good education, public education, access to good health. And all of us, the middle class, the rich, we have run to private schools. And so the public schools that should build the capacity and capability of the poor are so weak that there's no learning taking place there.
I'm tempted to get into that debate, but I fear that it will derail. Because interestingly, I just went back to read Peter Kropotkin's arguments, from back in 1913 or whatever, for socialism and how you take from the rich and you give to the poor and blah, blah, blah. And I think that the economics doesn't work. I think the maths doesn't work. The challenge I have with the 20% tax on Lekki land, and I understand the concept, of dealing, helping the poor, is that where does that end? You get on that slope, and the next thing, the government keeps taxing the wealthy until it gets to a point where they're disincentivized from making wealth, and then everybody suffers. Yeah. But it always starts with, let's increase the tax a little bit, let's increase it a little bit. And then it gets to, what you find in some of the Scandinavian countries, although that's not a good example, but, what you find in some of these countries where taxes are in like the 70, 80%. If you did that in Nigeria, you could do it in those countries because they have the systems and so on. But if you did it in Nigeria, it would be a bigger problem because the ones we pay, we don't even get any value of.
Well. This was specific. By the way, I'm not against taxing. People should be taxed in accordance to what their income and wealth. Mm-hmm. And it is then left for the state to redirect it. In this very instance, I said it wasn't even tax. It was if you sold the land, mm-hmm, and you spent 20%, so you've already sold the land, it's not a tax. If you sold the land in Ikoyi and Banana Island and all the places, this is sale now, the government has sold. Why are you now devoting 20-30% of the money you it doesn't even have to be taxed to public housing? Because the poor also they are part of the ownership of that land. That's the point I was making. But even if it means a little tax here and there, in order to improve our public school, by the way, why do you think public schools in America are run with a property tax? And that is why you find that the more affluent an area, the more money they have and the better quality school they have. So, and that's also an argument when you want to deal with issues of inequality. So the poor, because they live in poor neighborhoods, they don't collect enough taxes to run their school. There should be some mechanism for bridging that gap. And I think if we are interested in dealing with issues of insecurity and understanding the ills, first of all, you have to understand the ill of inequality. Because this is a relativity matter, that someone gets a sense that what belongs to all of us is now exclusively being enjoyed by a certain cadre. And, Lee Kuan Yew, my favorite leader, he said, I am building a nation where everyone has a stake in it now and it is future. And if you saw in the book, I said, what it means is that if this a nation that Lee Kuan Yew is creating, I'm not even able to partake, I will work hard because my children will be able to partake.
Exactly.
But if my children will not even partake, why should I even work hard now? So that sense of inclusion is extremely important for this purpose, for this conversation.
Just to remind us again that, the book is Development as Attitude. The subtitle is How National Progress is Shaped by Leadership Philosophy and Citizens Orientation. It is sold everywhere you get your books. I know that Roving Heights has a lot of copies in Nigeria. There's a question from Elima Ezani. Thank you, Prof. An excellent analysis and well done for writing the book. Nigeria's fundamental deficit is in a greater uninformed and illiterate mass in its population. It hurts to admit it, but Nigerians remain intellectually deficient for the effective functioning of a modern state. our educational system is defective and incapable from early years to secondary school, the crucial ages of rational thinking. Her question, therefore, is, can we ever get it right? Can Awolowo and Jakonde's prescient understanding of education as crucial to development be resuscitated across Nigeria?
I think so. I think they should assemble all the 36 governors of Nigeria and invite me so that I will tell them exactly what I think. Because I have seen states, and Patrick, you know these states, that have invested in flyovers and structures and massive infrastructure. But go and check their ranking in the poverty index. Awful. So they understand the physical infrastructure, but they don't understand the social infrastructure. You know, you develop a nation when you develop the capacity and capability of the individuals within the nation. And we're now talking about global citizens, meaning, you know, many Nigerians do not know that only about 30% of Americans have university education. Once you have a good, solid primary and secondary education, you are educated.
First 3 years of secondary, not even the whole 6 years. First 3 years.
I'm just saying that once you have the ability to pick this my book now and read and understand it, you're educated.
Correct.
And in America, many of them have that capacity. In fact, there are people without degrees who have gone on to hold positions and return as professors in university.
Exactly. Professor of
because
practice.
of that, and they have even written books.
Correct.
Yeah. So we should understand the power of primary and secondary education, the quality of it, and how it can open doors for a lot of citizens. So we must have a way in which the state governments understand this, to realize, you know, I was saying recently, you know, if you want to improve education in Nigeria, you know, the most critical factor in improvement of education is not the structure, it's teacher quality. The one who is passing the instruction, who is teaching, what does the person know? So, you know, but she has a point. No way, of course, there is hope. Over time, people are consciously, even the last election gave us a glimpse that people know the difference between leader A and leader B. People are beginning, you know, when we see new emerging leaders have some demonstration effect, maybe others will join, more people will be recruited. You know.
Okay, Prof. Let me leave the book for a minute and go to other aspects of your life that I'm interested in knowing more of. You know, so back in '87, you wrote a book of fiction, The Moon Also Sets. What happened to that part of your life? How come we haven't seen any additional books of fiction, but we've seen a number of non-fiction books?
Yes. Thank you for that. I hope that readers can also order that book. I think it's a bit expensive now because I don't know what I'm trying to read.
It's $38 on Amazon.
No, I'm trying to republish that book in Nigeria because, you see, I wrote it when I was in Kenya.
Yeah.
So it was published by the East African Educational Publishers, which is actually the equivalent of Heinemann. Then they gave it to Heinemann Nigeria, who also published it, but I hear Heinemann Nigeria is almost folded or something like that. So I'm discussing with some people because by the way, that book is now an A-level text in Uganda. It's used for A-level examination. So if you go to the internet and Google that book, you will see now books written on it because they are preparing people for exams.
In fact, on YouTube, they have some lessons on the book.
Thank you. It's because
they have some video lessons on the book.
It's because it's a text in Uganda, and I can't wait to get to Uganda so that I will be a celebrity. But I have almost a sequel that I'm almost, it takes me years to write. But the COVID era helped me. So I have written 90% of my second one.
Okay.
I hope that some of you will keep asking me so that I can complete the 10%. And because I enjoy writing fiction.
Yeah.
And fiction mimics reality.
Mm-hmm.
And you can convey a lot. You can reach a wider audience with fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So stay tuned. More to come.
Excellent. Excellent. Another question is, you've been in think tanks, you've worked in the development space, in academia. Why is it difficult to build successful think tanks in Nigeria?
For one clear reason, I think most times they are built around individuals.
Okay.
So it becomes problematic, just like these individual businesses, to create succession. So I have a simple test. I was telling someone that if I walk into a think tank and I see the MD, and make note of this, Patrick, putting his hand in his pocket to buy a newspaper, I say, they have not created an institution.
Correct.
Newspaper should be supplied, and there is a process of paying
The
the
vendor.
person who has supplied this newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
Second point is issues of governance. I created an institution. That institution you mentioned in my introduction, the African Technology Policy Studies Network, was basically set up by me, made it an international institution in Kenya. And as I speak to you today, it is still running. It's running because I had over 10 years experience with the International Development Research Center of Canada. And so I carried that experience. It carried the system of control, the system of operation to a very new nascent institution. And so if you have institutions that do not have proper governance structure. So for instance, you said my board meets twice a year. Do they actually meet twice a year? Or you have names on your board that do not even come for meetings. So I'm answering your question by saying, once you don't have structures, they're not set up properly. And of course, the other factor is donor dependence. But even this donor dependence might not be a problem if these structures exist, because donors are also looking for institutions through which they can deliver their programs. But if they come in and they see weak institutions without proper management structure, I remember when I set up that institution a few years after, and the Swedish government wanted to give us money, and they sent 2 Swedes to evaluate us. It taught me a lot. And that's when I knew that what I had created was something strong. Because they couldn't find fault. They were at a loss as to, for instance, simple things like, how does the executive director travel? There has to be some paper trail. Who originates it? Who determines what is the basis upon which the per diem you travel with? And so all these things they must see. Because they're looking for accountability. So if you said your board met twice, like in our case, they said they wanted to see the minutes. And once they saw the minutes, they saw a directive from the board and asked you, how did you execute this directive? So these things must come together for institutions to survive.
Interesting. Interesting book. I totally enjoyed it. I hope the leaders get a chance to read it, but I also know that they're busy with a lot of things. So let's assume scenario. You are in an elevator at the Transcorp Hilton. You get in and President Tinubu is in that elevator with you, and you guys are going up to the 10th floor. So very short ride. How do you crystallize the key message from this book that you want him to take away and implement? Short ride.
Short will be, we don't know what you stand for? Can you explain it to all of us, to the National Assembly, to your operators, clearly in a message, and continue to drum it in, and it will be reflected in your next budget? This is in 3 minutes, I will have delivered this message. And if this clarity is not there, can you assemble people and tell them the story, and they can provide the clarity?
Fantastic. Besides the book of fiction, which I will now keep reminding you every time we meet, what else are you working on currently?
Actually, I just gave a lecture in Bells University, and because I thought you were going to go, and maybe that's our next conversation on the on China. And it was a bit on this leadership philosophy, but more on state capacity. Because when you have this philosophy and there's no state capacity to translate, it's problematic.
Correct.
And so I see governors discarding the bureaucracy. It's not a good idea. I see ministers coming into a ministry, coming with 20 advisors. Not a good idea. Remember, Christ recruited the 12 apostles from within. He didn't manufacture them from outside. So those who will create change exist. You need to convince these guardians of change, this coalition, for that change to be impactful. So I think that I wrote a paper once, and I said, there is a minister's reform and a ministry's reform. The minister's reform goes with the minister. But if it was a ministry's reform, which means they owned it, it will outlive the minister.
You talked about bureaucracy, and I saw Professor Tunji Oloba's hand up. He's been tasked to solve that specific challenge. And Professor Oloba, if you can hear me, maybe you unmute and make a 1 to 2 minute comment.
Am I heard now?
Yes.
Yes, you're heard.
Okay, no, but I will not use this opportunity to talk bureaucracy. I'll rather just say that to congratulate my big brother, Professor Ogbu. Hearing from him that development is an attitude is perhaps the most philosophical and relevant statement that I've had in recent time in discourse. Because it communicates in an inexpressible way, something I've been looking for in putting the Nigerian problematics in perspective. We need, and thank you, Patrick, they just took light in my office. I have to find a way of seeing my notes. So please, 1 second. I think I can, okay. So we need to do more interrogating the thesis and the nuances of this important book. I grew up hearing this kind of thesis from my mentor, late Professor Aboyade, when he said Nigerians appear to, Nigerians don't seem to understand what development is all about. Stoper said it in another way when he said Nigerian plan without facts, meaning that people that lack scientific orientation can hardly get anything done. An audio family recently says the Nigerian elites don't take Nigeria seriously. And so all of these are so apt for me, captured as development is an attitude. And I ask myself, what people calls his own country a project? We talk of Nigerian project. We suggest that deep down, for Nigerian elite, Nigeria is more of a concept, one that can be dismantled if sufficiently provoked. The reason that we play politics with virtually everything, to an extent that we cannot reach agreement on those issues that should shape the national question. And so when we say there is no consensus, we cannot reach agreement, Achebe says is because leadership is missing, and the likes of Asemoglu and Robinson said it is because real institutions grounded on constitutional order and rule of law have not been built, which raises the question, can strong institution be built on an inchoate, elite? We may disagree on so many things, but my conclusion is that perhaps we agree in sufficient, significant issues, few, and that is what has kept us together. But let me make confession that though I browsed through the book, I had meant to read it so now I'm forced, because of listening to the latter part of this conversation, to quickly go back and read this book and perhaps then do my reflection a lot more profoundly. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Locke.
Thank you very much, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah.
Last word from you, Professor Ogbu.
To thank you, Patrick, for this opportunity. You asked me a question about what next, and I said, I'm curious about this issue of state capacity and how you build it, and how we have neglected the role in development. And fundamentally, this thing about, meritocracy, and so if you want to development, economic change is deliberate and purposeful.
Exactly.
They don't occur by accident.
Exactly.
They have to be driven painstakingly, and you need state capacity that can incentivize as well as punish. So on that note, I want to thank you, and I look forward to another edition.
No, thank you very much, Prof. And still on the question of state capacity, there's a brilliant book, State Capacity and China. There's a brilliant book by Professor Yashuang Huang. I'm sure I'm messing up the name, but the title of the book is The Rise and Fall of East. Yeah, The Rise and Fall of East. And East is an acronym for Education, Autocracy, Stability, and Technology. And he speaks to how centuries of just building the Chinese bureaucracy through education, is what gave them the capacity to go from GDP per capita far less than Nigeria's GDP per capita in 1980 to become, the second largest economy in the world today. But to thank everyone, who's joined us today, and to also invite you that in 2 weeks' time, I would have the honor of discussing with Professor Chidi Odinkalo, and the topic will be on rule of law, security, and transitional justice in fragile and conflict-affected nascent democracies. If you've been focusing on the issues we're dealing with in Nigeria, you know that would be a really interesting conversation. It will be on June 26th, and I'm hoping that you find some time to join us. Professor Ogbu, thank you so much for making
Thank
time.
you. And Patrick, you didn't mention that the book is also on Amazon.
Yes, and the book, The Development as Attitude, is on Amazon. That's where I got it. But if you're in Nigeria, Roving Heights, and I'm sure Roving Heights is listening, Dotun. They've got bookstores everywhere. They will become our own Barnes and Noble. I'm really rooting for them. They've got, locations all over Nigeria and still expanding. So just reach out to them and they'll deliver to your doorstep. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.